The marketplace of Glimmer's 4 was chaos incarnate. Voices shouted in a cacophony of alien tongues, competing with the hum of anti-grav carts and the hiss of steam vents. Traders, buyers, and scavengers jostled shoulder to tentacle, some exchanging credits, others bartering with rare materials or obscure promises. For a human like Tessa Morgan, it was equal parts opportunity and danger. She darted between stalls, her small frame slipping unnoticed past towering Zelvians, hunched Alaxians, and the occasional mechanical trader drone. A scavenged satchel bounced against her hip, its contents rattling, a collection of circuit boards, broken power cells, and a half-working translator chip. "This'll get me enough for dinner," she muttered, scanning for a buyer. She glanced up at the smog-drenched sky, where starships blinked like distant jewels. Someday, she swore, she'd be up there. No more scraping by on this suffocating rock. She'd find her freedom, one way or another. Her wandering gaze snagged on a derelict spacecraft displayed on the far side of the market. It was wedged awkwardly between two stalls, its hull scarred and scorched, the once sleek lines marred by age and neglect. It was no pristine cruiser, but to Tessa, it looked like salvation. "Perfect," she whispered. She approached cautiously, weaving through the crowd. The ship was surrounded by a gathering of Zelvian merchants, their elongated forms shimmering with bioluminescent patterns. One of them, clearly the leader, lounged on a hover throne, a creature with 4 clawed arms and a sneer that revealed needle-like teeth. Tessa adjusted her satchel and put on her best confident grin. "Who's selling the ship?" The lounging Zelvian, Captain Vorix, turned his glowing, pupilless eyes on her. "The human speaks. How quaint." His voice was smooth, like oil sliding over glass. "I'm interested," Tessa said, ignoring the derision. "How much?" The surrounding Zelvians hissed and chittered in amusement, but Vorix leaned forward, his clawed fingers steepled. "Do you even know what you're looking at, little scavenger?" Tessa tilted her head, feigning indifference. "Looks like an old freighter to me. It's banged up, sure, but with a bit of work, it'll fly." The hissing grew louder, more pointed. Tessa felt her cheeks flush but stood her ground. "This," Vorix said, gesturing to the ship as if unveiling a masterpiece, "is no mere freighter. It is a relic of my people's glorious past. The vessel that once carried my great ancestor to victory in the wars of the Infinite Divide. Its value is beyond your comprehension." Tessa squinted at the ship. "Sure doesn't look like a relic." The hissing stopped. The air grew thick with tension. "I'll give you 20 credits for it," she said, patting her satchel. The silence that followed was absolute. The other Zelvians recoiled, their bioluminescent patterns flickering in what Tessa belatedly realized was outrage. One of them actually collapsed into a gelatinous heap, quivering in apparent shock. Vorix rose from his throne, towering over her. His claws extended, each one gleaming like a polished blade. "You dare offer money for a vessel of sacred heritage?" Tessa blinked. Yeah? That's how buying stuff works." "You insult the honor of my people!" Vorix roared, his voice reverberating through the marketplace. "Such an offer is a declaration of war, a blood feud." Tessa's heart plummeted. "Wait, what?" The crowd surged around her, murmuring and clicking in languages she couldn't understand. Panic clawed at her chest. She raised her hands defensively. "Okay, hold on. I didn't mean." "Silence!" Vorix snarled. His bioluminescence flared, signaling the Zelvian equivalent of a death glare. "You have disgraced me, human. Your pitiful existence is forfeit." The crowd erupted into chaos as Vorix barked orders to his enforcers, hulking brutes with segmented armor and plasma staffs. Tessa didn't wait to hear the rest. She spun on her heel and bolted into the crowd, her satchel clattering against her side. "Stop her!" Vorix bellowed. Tessa ducked under a hovering cart, narrowly avoiding a swipe from one of the enforcers. She weaved through the crowd, her mind racing. How had this gone so wrong? All she'd wanted was a ship, not an interspecies vendetta. A plasma bolt sizzled past her ear, and she yelped, diving into a narrow alley. The marketplace noise faded as she sprinted through the labyrinthine back streets, her boots pounding against the metal-plated ground. "Think, Tessa," she muttered, glancing over her shoulder. The enforcers were still chasing her, their heavy footsteps echoing. "How do you get out of this?" She spotted a stack of discarded crates and scrambled up, pulling herself onto a low rooftop. From there, she could see the market below, a swirling sea of alien chaos, with Vorix's enforcers cutting a path through it like predators on the hunt. Tessa's gaze landed on the derelict ship. Her heart thudded. She didn't know why it was so important to the Zelvians, but if it was her only shot at escape, she had to take it. She jumped down from the rooftop, landing hard but steady, and slipped back toward the ship. The crowd was too distracted by the commotion to notice her as she crept closer. When she reached the ship, she hesitated. The hull was scorched and battered, its entry ramp half buried in rubble. It didn't look functional, but Tessa wasn't in a position to be picky. She scrambled inside, coughing at the stale air. The interior was dimly lit, the walls lined with strange symbols that glowed faintly. She ran her fingers over a control panel, trying to make sense of the alien interface. "Come on," she whispered, pressing buttons at random. "You've got to have something left in you." A low hum resonated through the ship. Lights flickered, and a voice, deep and metallic, echoed from the walls. "Unauthorized access detected," it intoned. "Identify yourself." Tessa froze. Tessa Morgan? Just a scavenger trying not to die." The voice posed. "Humanoid. Minimal threat detected. State your purpose." "I need to get out of here," Tessa said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "And I think you need a pilot." The ship was silent for a moment. Then, to her astonishment, it replied, "Your logic is acceptable. Limited functionality available. Destination? Anywhere but here," she said, glancing out a viewport. The enforcers were closing in fast, their plasma staffs glowing ominously. "Understood." The ship's systems whirred to life, and Tessa felt the deck vibrate beneath her feet. The entry ramp began to retract as the engines sputtered and roared. The last thing she saw before the ship lifted off was Vorix, his glowing eyes blazing with fury as he shouted, "You will pay for this, human!" As the ship rose into the smog-filled sky, Tessa leaned back against the wall and exhaled shakily. "Well," she muttered, "that could have gone worse." But deep down, she knew this was just the beginning of her problems. The derelict ship bucked violently as it tore through the choking smog of Glimmerous 4's lower atmosphere. Sparks burst from panels along the walls, the hum of struggling engines reverberating through the cabin. Tessa clung to the nearest railing, her knuckles white. Is this normal?" she shouted, glancing at the flickering lights overhead. "This vessel is operating at 7% capacity," the deep, metallic voice of the ship's AI replied. "Stabilization protocols are compromised. Immediate repairs are recommended." "Fantastic," Tessa muttered. She forced herself upright, her legs wobbling beneath her. The control console blinked erratically, its alien symbols shifting in colors and shapes she couldn't decipher. "Look, ship. AI, whatever you are, can you fly us somewhere safe?" "I am Erivos," the voice replied, its tone steady despite the ship's precarious state. "Destination coordinates are undefined. Specify safe location." "Anywhere Vorix can't find me," Tessa snapped, flinching as another jolt sent her crashing into the bulkhead. "Noted. Maneuvering to evade pursuit," Erivos responded. Tessa pushed herself off the wall, her head spinning. Through the viewport, she could see Glimmerous 4 shrinking below, the once chaotic market now reduced to a blur of shimmering lights. Relief surged in her chest, until she spotted 2 sleek Zelvian pursuit ships slicing through the atmosphere after her. Their hulls gleamed like polished obsidian, their plasma cannons glowing ominously. "They're following us!" she exclaimed, pointing at the rapidly approaching ships. "Zelvian interceptors detected," Erivos confirmed. "Probability of successful evasion, 34%. "Great odds," Tessa muttered sarcastically. Her mind raced. She had no idea how to operate this ship, let alone outmaneuver professional hunters and cutting-edge vessels. But she wasn't about to give up. What can you do? Weapons, shields, anything? Weapons systems are offline, Irivos said flatly. Deflector shields are operational but at minimal capacity. Recommend evasive maneuvers. The first plasma bolt streaked past the ship, illuminating the cabin in a searing blue flash. Tessa ducked instinctively, though she knew it wouldn't help much if they were hit. Evasive maneuvers! Now! She shouted. Irivos complied without hesitation. The ship banked sharply to the left, sending Tessa sprawling across the floor. She clawed her way to the pilot's seat, gripping the controls despite having no idea how to use them. What do these even do? She muttered, fumbling with the alien interface. Manual control is inadvisable, Irivos stated. Your skill level is insufficient. Tessa scowled. Thanks for the vote of confidence. Just tell me how to help. Divert auxiliary power to deflector shields, Irivos instructed. Access panel on your left. She scrambled to the panel, prying it open to reveal a tangle of wires and glowing nodes. Which one? The red conduit. Disconnect and reroute to the primary relay. Got it, Tessa said, though her hands shook as she worked. The ship shuddered again as another plasma bolt grazed the hull, filling the cabin with the acrid smell of burned metal. You know, for an ancient relic, you're holding up pretty well. I am considerably more advanced than my outward appearance suggests, Irivos replied, his tone almost smug. Tessa managed to reroute the power just as another volley of plasma bolts streaked past. This time, the ship's shields flared to life, deflecting the blasts with a shimmering golden field. Yes! She cheered, though her victory was short-lived. The interceptors adjusted their course, closing the distance with alarming speed. Enemy ships are coordinating attack patterns, Irivos warned. Probability of successful evasion reduced to 21%. Tessa's mind raced. She couldn't outrun them forever, and the ship was too damaged to fight back. But if she couldn't win with speed or strength, maybe she could outthink them. Irivos, are there any debris fields or asteroid belts nearby? She asked, a plan forming in her head. Scanning. The pause felt like an eternity. A derelict debris field is located in Sector 4 Gamma. Probability of survival through hazardous navigation, 14%. Tessa grinned despite the odds. Better than nothing. Set a course. The ship veered sharply, the interceptors adjusting their pursuit. Tessa strapped herself into the pilot's seat, gripping the armrests as Irivos accelerated toward the debris field. Moments later, they plunged into the heart of the field. Shattered remnants of old starships floated in a chaotic expanse, jagged hull fragments glinting in the faint light of a distant star. Irivos wove through the debris with precision, though the ship groaned in protest with every maneuver. The Zelvian interceptors followed, their plasma cannons firing relentlessly. A bolt struck a nearby chunk of wreckage, sending shards of metal spiraling dangerously close to Tessa's ship. Any chance we can use this field to lose them? She asked, her voice tight with fear. Analyzing. Irivos' tone grew sharper. Engage manual release for cargo hold. I will redirect debris to obstruct pursuit. On it. Tessa unbuckled herself and stumbled to the rear of the ship. The cargo hold was empty save for a few loose panels and storage crates. She located the manual release lever and yanked it with all her strength. The ship shuddered as the cargo doors opened, exposing the hold to the vacuum of space. Irivos activated the maneuver, spinning the ship and using its limited thrusters to hurl chunks of debris into the interceptor's path. The first Zelvian ship swerved too late, colliding with a massive chunk of twisted metal. The impact tore through its hull, and it exploded in a brilliant flash. One down! Tessa shouted, adrenaline surging. The remaining interceptor continued its pursuit, firing more plasma bolts. One struck the edge of the cargo bay, sending sparks flying. Tessa shielded her face as the blast rattled the entire ship. Irivos, this guy's not giving up. Diverting remaining power to propulsion, Irivos said. Brace for acceleration. Tessa barely had time to grab hold of a railing before the ship lurched forward, rocketing through the debris field. The sudden burst of speed caught the interceptor off guard, and it struggled to keep up. Erivos executed a final sharp turn, weaving through a cluster of jagged wreckage. The interceptor followed, but clipped the edge of a massive fragment. The collision sent it spinning out of control, its plasma core destabilizing. Tessa watched through the viewport as the enemy ship erupted in a fiery explosion, the shockwave rattling Erivos but leaving them intact. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Pursuit vessels neutralized," Erivos confirmed. Tessa slumped against the wall, her legs giving out beneath her. Relief washed over her, though her heart still hammered in her chest. "I can't believe we made it. Your ingenuity contributed to our survival," Erivos said. Tessa managed a weak laugh. "Yeah, well, don't get used to it. I'm just making this up as I go." The ship drifted out of the debris field, the stars stretching endlessly before them. Tessa stared out at the expanse, a flicker of determination reigniting within her. "We're not out of this yet, Erivos," she said quietly. "But at least now we've got a fighting chance." Tessa reclined in the pilot's chair, the adrenaline of the chase still coursing through her veins. Erivos' hum had quieted, but the ship's condition was dire. Sparks sporadically burst from exposed wiring, the lights flickered with unnerving irregularity, and a faint smell of scorched metal lingered in the air. She wiped sweat from her brow and sighed deeply. "Well, Erivos, we're alive, for now." "What's the damage?" "Structural integrity compromised in multiple sections," Erivos replied. "Primary thrusters operating at 45% capacity. Power reserves critically depleted. Immediate repairs required for sustained operation." Tessa groaned and massaged her temples. "Yeah, because I'm a galactic engineer with a toolbox just lying around." She glanced out the viewport, the endless stretch of stars both mesmerizing and daunting. "Where's the nearest planet? Somewhere we can hide, maybe scrounge up supplies?" Erivos hesitated. "Nearest habitable planet is designated Arcterra 9. However, it is a hostile environment with limited resources and extreme weather conditions. Probability of survival, 28%. Tessa leaned back and let out a bitter laugh. 28% is starting to sound like a pretty good deal these days. "Plot a course." "Course plotted," Erivos confirmed. "Estimated arrival, 17 hours. The ship's engine sputtered as it limped into motion. Tessa pushed herself out of the chair, her muscles aching from the earlier chaos. She needed to take stock of what she had, if anything, that could keep her afloat. The cargo bay was nearly empty, the only notable contents being the panel she'd ripped off earlier and a single storage crate. "Let's see what treasure you're hiding," she muttered, prying the crate open. Inside, she found a mishmash of tools, alien devices she couldn't identify, and a bundle of strange, translucent wires. "This doesn't scream emergency survival kit," she muttered, but she pocketed a multi-tool anyway. She turned back to the walls of the cargo bay, her eyes catching the faint glow of the strange symbols that adorned the interior. "Hey, Erivos," she called, running her fingers over the markings. "What's with these? Just decorative, or do they mean something?" The AI's tone shifted, deeper and more deliberate. "Those markings are inscriptions of Zelvian origin, detailing the ship's lineage and purpose." Tessa frowned. "Purpose? What kind of purpose does an old rust bucket have?" There was a pause. "This vessel was not constructed for mere transportation. It served as a flagship in the wars of the Infinite Divide. Its systems are imbued with experimental Zelvian technology, capable of extraordinary feats." Tessa's curiosity flared. "Extraordinary feats? Like what?" "The details are classified," Erivos replied, his tone sharp. Tessa narrowed her eyes. "You're my ship now, remember? If I'm putting my neck on the line for you, I deserve answers. What kind of tech are we talking about?" The pause that followed stretched uncomfortably long. Finally, Erivos spoke. "The core of this vessel contains a Zelvian relic known as the Lumina Nexus. It is an energy source of unparalleled potency, capable of manipulating spatial and temporal dimensions. Tessa blinked. You're telling me this junk heap has a superweapon just sitting in its core? It is not a weapon, Irivos clarified. The Nexus was designed to fuel interdimensional exploration and accelerate technological evolution. However, its power has been misused in the past, leading to its classification as a forbidden artifact. Tessa paced the cargo bay, her thoughts racing. No wonder Vorax and his crew had been so protective of the ship. If the Zelvians knew she had this, she'd be hunted across the galaxy. What's stopping you from using it now? She asked. The Nexus is dormant, Irivos explained. Its activation requires a specific key, a Zelvian artifact known as the Solemn Catalyst. Without it, the Nexus remains inert. Tessa let out a slow breath, equal parts relieved and disappointed. Okay, so no instant death ray. That's good. But why didn't Vorax or his crew take it off the ship if it's so dangerous? Removing the Nexus would destabilize this vessel's core systems, rendering it inoperable, Irivos said. Well, that explains why they kept it around. Tessa leaned against the wall, staring at the glowing symbols. So, what now? Are we just sitting on a bomb that doesn't tick? Incorrect, Irivos said, his tone turning ominous. The Zelvians will not abandon their pursuit. Vorax has likely already transmitted a distress signal to his fleet, alerting them to the loss of this vessel. Tessa swore under her breath. So even if we get to Arctera 9, it's only a matter of time before they track us down. Affirmative, Irivos replied. Her stomach churned, but she pushed the fear aside. Fine. Then we don't just survive, we fight back. If Vorax wants this ship so badly, there's gotta be a way to turn it against him. Suggesting aggressive retaliation is inadvisable, Irivos said. Yeah, well, either is dying in space, Tessa shot back. You said this ship was a flagship, right? That means it was built for war. Even if the weapons are offline, there's gotta be something we can use. There was another pause, longer this time. This vessel's tactical systems were deactivated during decommissioning. However, certain subsystems remain functional. I will assess their potential for reactivation. Tessa felt a flicker of hope. Good. Do that. In the meantime, let's focus on getting to Arctera 9 without falling apart. She returned to the cockpit, her mind buzzing with possibilities. If Irivos could reactivate even a fraction of the ship's old capabilities, they might stand a chance against Vorax's fleet. But that would require time, resources, and a whole lot of luck, none of which were in great supply. As the hours dragged on, the stars outside seemed to blur together. Tessa found herself staring at the empty expanse, her thoughts drifting. She thought of Earth, of the family she hadn't seen in years, and of the life she'd left behind. She'd always wanted adventure, a way to prove she was more than just another forgotten kid in a crowded system. But now, with the weight of the galaxy pressing down on her, she wasn't so sure she was ready for the price of freedom. Irivos, she said quietly, breaking the silence. Yes, Tessa? Why did you let me on this ship? She asked. You could have just locked me out and waited for Vorax to come back. The AI's voice softened, almost imperceptibly. The Zelvians sought to dismantle this vessel for their own gain, forsaking the legacy it represents. You, despite your ignorance, seek freedom. That is a purpose I can support. Tessa smiled faintly. Thanks, I guess. The ship trembled as it approached Arctera 9, the distant planet growing larger in the viewport. Its surface glowed faintly, covered in jagged ice formations and swirling tempests of violet clouds. It didn't look welcoming, but for now, it was their best chance at survival. Buckle up, Irivos, Tessa muttered, gripping the controls. This is just the beginning. Arctera 9 loomed large in the viewport, a swirling tempest of violet clouds and jagged ice formations. The planet's surface reflected faint glimmers of its distant star, like shards of a shattered mirror. Tessa adjusted her seatbelt, her stomach twisting at the sight of the chaotic, uninviting terrain. So, this is where we're supposed to survive, she muttered, gripping the armrests as Irivos navigated the ship through the upper atmosphere. The turbulence was immediate and violent, shaking the vessel as it descended through the thick storm clouds. Atmospheric conditions are unstable, Irivos informed her. Wind speeds exceeding 300 kilometers per hour. Probability of safe landing, 52%. Could you stop giving me percentages every 5 seconds? Tessa snapped. Her hands clenched tighter as the ship jolted violently to the right. Just get us down in one piece. Executing precision descent, Irivos replied. The ship bucked as it broke through the storm, revealing the surface below, an endless expanse of jagged ice ridges and deep crevasses, illuminated by faint blue bioluminescence. Lightning crackled across the horizon, followed by distant, low rumbles of thunder. Tessa swallowed hard. It looked like a graveyard for lost ships, and she had no intention of adding Irivos to the list. Landing sequence initiated, Irivos announced as the ship's thrusters flared to slow their descent. The landing was rough. The ship hit the frozen ground with a heavy thud, skidding across the icy surface before grinding to a halt near the base of a massive glacier. Tessa released the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. We're down, she murmured, her voice shaky. Structural integrity intact, Irivos confirmed. Atmospheric conditions remain hostile. Recommend immediate shelter. Tessa unbuckled her seatbelt and stood, her legs unsteady beneath her. She grabbed the small pack she'd hastily prepared during the journey, a few tools, a portable heat generator, and a rudimentary scanner. Guess I'm on my own out there, she muttered, heading toward the airlock. Correct, Irivos replied. However, I will monitor your movements and provide tactical support where possible. Tessa snorted. Yeah, because that's been working so well so far. She pressed the airlock controls, and the outer door hissed open. A blast of freezing wind hit her like a wall, forcing her to brace herself. She pulled the hood of her insulated jacket tight and stepped out onto the ice. The landscape was as harsh as it was mesmerizing. Towering ice spires rose like frozen monuments, their edges sharp and jagged. The wind howled, carrying with it an eerie, almost melodic hum. Tessa activated her scanner, which immediately began to whir and beep as it analyzed the surroundings. Irivos, you picking up anything useful? She asked, her voice muffled by the wind. Energy signatures detected approximately 1 kilometer northwest, Irivos replied. Source unknown. Tessa frowned. Think it's salvageable tech? Possibility exists. However, proceed with caution. The source may not be uninhabited. Tessa sighed and tightened the straps on her pack. Of course it wouldn't be. She trudged through the snow, each step sinking into the icy terrain. The cold bit at her face, and the howling wind seemed determined to push her back. Her scanner beeped steadily, guiding her toward the energy signature. As she crested a ridge, she stopped in her tracks. Below her, nestled in the shadow of a massive ice spire, was what appeared to be an old Zelvian outpost. The structure was partially buried under layers of ice and snow, its smooth metallic walls weathered but intact. Strange, faintly glowing glyphs adorned its surface, their light pulsing rhythmically. Well, that's not ominous at all, Tessa muttered. Analysis indicates the outpost predates the current Zelvian fleet, Irivos said. It may contain resources or information of significant value. Or it could be a trap, Tessa added, sliding down the icy slope toward the structure. She approached cautiously, her eyes scanning for any signs of movement. The air was eerily still, save for the hum of the glyphs and the faint crackling of ice beneath her boots. The entrance to the outpost was partially frozen shut. Tessa pulled out her multi-tool and began chipping away at the ice, her breath fogging up her visor. After several grueling minutes, the door finally groaned open, revealing a dimly lit interior. She stepped inside, her scanners beeping growing louder. The air was marginally warmer, though still cold enough to make her fingers ache. The walls were covered in more glowing glyphs, their light casting strange shadows across the room. Irivos, you getting this? She asked, holding up her scanner. Affirmative, Irivos replied. This facility appears to be a research station. The energy signature originates from a central chamber deeper within. Of course it does, Tessa muttered. She moved cautiously through the corridors, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The place felt abandoned, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. As she approached the central chamber, the hum of the glyphs grew louder, almost as if they were reacting to her presence. The door to the chamber slid open with a hiss, revealing a massive, circular room. At the center stood a crystalline structure, its surface shimmering with an otherworldly light. The energy signature was coming from within it, pulsing like a heartbeat. "What is that?" Tessa whispered, her eyes wide. "The solemn catalyst," Irivos said, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. Tessa froze. "Wait, you mean the key to the Lumina Nexus? It's here?" "Affirmative," Irivos replied. "This discovery is highly significant. However, it is also highly dangerous. The catalyst's activation may alert nearby Zelvian forces." Tessa's heart pounded. She knew the stakes. With the catalyst, Irivos' full potential could be unleashed, giving her a fighting chance against the Zelvians. But taking it meant painting an even bigger target on her back. Before she could make a decision, a low, guttural growl echoed through the chamber. Tessa spun around, her hand instinctively reaching for the small energy pistol at her side. From the shadows emerged a towering figure, its body encased in sleek, black armor that seemed to ripple like liquid. Its glowing red eyes locked onto Tessa, and it raised a massive, clawed hand. "Unauthorized presence detected," the figure growled, its voice deep and mechanical. "Irivos?" Tessa whispered, backing away slowly. "Hostile entity identified, Zelvian Enforcer Unit," Irivos said. "Engage with extreme caution." The Enforcer stepped closer, its movements unnervingly fluid. "Surrender the catalyst," it commanded, its voice echoing through the chamber. Tessa's grip tightened on her pistol. Her mind raced. She couldn't take this thing head-on, it was too powerful. But she wasn't about to hand over the one thing that could give her an edge. She glanced at the catalyst, then back at the Enforcer. "Yeah, that's not happening," she said, raising her pistol. The Enforcer lunged, and the room erupted into chaos. Tessa ducked as the Enforcer's massive clawed hand swung toward her, slamming into the wall with enough force to send cracks spidering through the ice-covered metal. She rolled to the side, her breath visible in the cold air, and fired her energy pistol. The bolt sizzled harmlessly against the Enforcer's armor, barely leaving a scorch mark. "Great," she muttered under her breath. "Of course, it's indestructible." The Enforcer straightened, its glowing red eyes narrowing. "Resistance is futile," it growled, advancing toward her with deliberate, heavy steps. "The catalyst belongs to the Zelvian Dominion." Tessa's mind raced. The catalyst still shimmered in the center of the room, pulsing with light, as if waiting for her to make a move. Irivos' voice cut through the chaos in her earpiece. "Tessa, the catalyst is the key to activating the Lumina Nexus. If you retrieve it, I can temporarily boost this vessel's systems to maximum capacity. However, the Enforcer will not allow you to escape unchallenged." "No kidding!" she shouted, narrowly dodging another swing. Her back hit the icy wall, and she realized she was running out of room to maneuver. She had no choice. With a burst of adrenaline, she sprinted toward the catalyst, her boots skidding on the slick floor. The Enforcer roared and lunged after her, but she was faster, just barely. She reached the crystalline structure and grabbed it, the cool surface humming against her palms. The moment she touched it, the glyphs on the walls flared to life, flooding the chamber with a brilliant blue light. The Enforcer froze, its red eyes flickering as if momentarily disoriented. "Tessa, the energy surge has disrupted the Enforcer systems," Irivos said. "This is your chance to escape." Tessa didn't need to be told twice. She clutched the catalyst tightly and bolted for the exit, her heart pounding. The Enforcer let out a guttural roar behind her, shaking off the effects of the surge and giving chase. She raced through the corridors, the sound of heavy footsteps echoing behind her. The cold air burned her lungs, but she didn't dare slow down. As she neared the entrance, she saw the swirling storm outside, her only cover. "Erivos, open the airlock!" she shouted. "Airlock opening," Erivos replied. The outer doors slid open just as Tessa burst through the entrance of the outpost. She didn't look back as she sprinted through the blinding snow, the catalyst's glow illuminating the path ahead. The Enforcer's mechanical growls grew louder, closer. She reached the ship and leaped through the airlock just as Erivos sealed the doors behind her. The Enforcer slammed into the hull with a deafening crash, but the ship held firm. "Punch it, Erivos!" Tessa yelled, collapsing into the pilot's chair. The ship's thrusters roared to life, and they lifted off, the Enforcer's clawed hands scraping against the hull as it tried to hold on. Tessa gritted her teeth as she pushed the controls forward, forcing the ship higher into the storm. "Structural integrity at risk," Erivos warned. "I don't care! Just get us out of here!" With a final, desperate jolt, the ship broke free of the Enforcer's grip and rocketed into the upper atmosphere. The storm faded behind them, and the icy surface of Arctera 9 disappeared into the swirling clouds below. Tessa slumped in her seat, her chest heaving. The catalyst still pulsed faintly in her lap, its light steady and calm, as if unaware of the chaos it had caused. "Erivos," she said between breaths. "What now?" "Now," Erivos replied, his voice steady. "We activate the Lumina Nexus." In the heart of the ship, the Lumina Nexus pulsed weakly, its once brilliant core dimmed by centuries of dormancy. Tessa placed the catalyst into the receptacle Erivos had guided her to, and the reaction was immediate. The Nexus flared to life, bathing the room in an ethereal glow. "Power levels increasing exponentially," Erivos reported. "Systems fully restored. Tactical capabilities online." Tessa felt a shiver run down her spine. "This thing better be worth it." "Enemy vessels inbound," Erivos said. "Zelvian fleet approaching from hyperspace. Estimated time to contact, 90 seconds. Tessa's hands tightened into fists. Of course, Vorix and his fleet wouldn't waste any time. "What are our options?" "With the Nexus active, I can utilize the ship's spatial displacement capabilities," Erivos said. "This will allow us to evade the fleet or engage them on favorable terms." Tessa frowned. "Displacement? Like teleportation?" "Correct," Erivos replied. "However, the process requires precise coordination. I suggest engaging the fleet to create a diversion while I prepare the displacement sequence." Tessa hesitated. She didn't want to fight, but running would only delay the inevitable. "All right," she said, sliding into the pilot's seat. "Let's give them a fight they'll never forget." The Zelvian fleet emerged from hyperspace, their sleek, obsidian ships surrounding Erivos like predators circling prey. Tessa's stomach churned, but she gritted her teeth and tightened her grip on the controls. "Erivos, activate weapon systems," she said. "Systems online," Erivos confirmed. "Targeting solution locked." The ship's cannons roared to life, unleashing a barrage of energy blasts that tore through the nearest Zelvian frigate. Explosions lit up the void, and Tessa allowed herself a small, grim smile. "Not bad for an old rust bucket," she muttered. The Zelvian ships returned fire, their energy beams slicing through the darkness. Tessa weaved and dodged, pushing the ship to its limits. The Lumina Nexus hummed beneath her feet, its power surging through the vessel like a living thing. "Displacement sequence ready," Erivos said. "Initiating in 5, 4. The ship shuddered as another blast hit the hull. Warning lights flared across the console, but Tessa refused to panic. 3, 2. A Zelvian battleship loomed ahead, its massive cannons charging for a final, devastating blow. "Now, Erivos!" Tessa shouted. The Nexus flared brighter than a supernova, and the ship disappeared in an instant, leaving the Zelvian fleet to fire into empty space. When the light faded, Tessa found herself staring at an unfamiliar starfield. The ship was eerily silent, save for the steady hum of the Nexus. "Where are we?" she asked. "Safe," Erivos replied. "For now." Tessa leaned back in her seat, exhaustion washing over her. The catalyst still pulsed faintly at her side, a reminder of the power she now held, and the enemies she had made. "This isn't over, is it?" she asked quietly. "No," Erivo said. "But you have taken the first step toward reclaiming your freedom." Tessa allowed herself a small smile. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt ready to face it.